Right, so let's jump straight into today's session. Our topic for today, and it's one that really doesn't get enough focus, but we really need to make sure we bring it to the forefront. And it's sustainability and a NED's opportunity to really achieve impact. What a topic. Today, our guest speaker is Susan Hooper, and I'm so delighted to have Susan with us today. Susan is a founding director of ChapterZero, and she's also involved in several startups in carbon capture and sustainability. Susan's also an ambassador for the World Travel and Tourism Council. She's the chair of Tangle Teaser, chair designate of Into Earth, and sits on the boards of Moonpig PLC, Eurowag PLC, and Uber UK. Wow. Prior to her plural career, Susan was also managing director of British Gas Residential Services, which was a £1.8 billion revenue division, leading the service and the repair, central heating installations, electrical services, and the Dyno Rod business units. I mean, we can all agree Susan is an absolute phenomenal person, and I'm so delighted to have her here this afternoon. So, Susan, over to you.
Thank you. But right from the get-go, I'd say you don't need to all agree on that. That's absolutely not necessary. Thank you so much for asking me to speak today to you all on the topic, which is really very, very close to my heart. It's a real pleasure specifically to talk to you because I know you all hold positions of influence. And what I do like talking about arm in arm with this topic is accountability. And we all hold it fairly and squarely. But I'm going to just give you a quick background. I don't know where any of you are in your climate journey, so I may give you too much, I may not give you enough, but forgive me. In the 10 minutes, what I'd like to do is try and provoke thought and really make you sit back and consider what options you have to make a difference on probably the most existential topic that we've got facing us on boards at the moment. So in a nutshell, sustainability, and by the way, I hate ESG because it waters down the sustainability part of it. So if I could move the S and the G out and just focus on the E, that's really what today is about. It's not that I don't care about those other topics. They are really, really important, but putting them together waters them all down. And I really, really want to keep the focus on sustainability. And why? Because it is urgent. It's massively urgent. And we are way behind. If we were having this discussion 20 years ago, it would be a very different one, but we're not. It's today. There's very, very clear value in driving change, both from a profitability point of view and ability to attract employees and customers. And I think the most important thing for this discussion is we are all in positions of influence, and it is our responsibility to make sure the right decisions are being made at board level for the company that you're representing. And everything that we are seeing, I talk about the urgency, and that's happening on our watch. I, for one, speak in the next 3 to 5 years. If we don't have impact during that time, reaching the targets that everyone talks of for 2050 won't be possible. Therefore, actually, the urgency is on us to make sure that we are doing the right things for the companies that we represent. Now, I think it's really important for me to say, I am not a climate scientist. I do care passionately about the outcome for the companies I represent, for the customers, personally, what we can all do to make a difference, and very personally for my son's future. It's a very compelling point that I think is important to bring up, that it's not all selflessness. It is about the next generation. And I now try very much to focus on the areas where I can make a difference. It can be very overwhelming if you think, well, what's the point of me trying because China's doing this or the US is not doing that? But what I'd like to leave behind is the thought that you need to focus on the areas that you can make a difference. So as Abisola mentioned, alongside my board roles, I'm a founding director of ChapterZero, which is an organization dedicated to helping board directors like yourselves get up to steam on the topic of climate change and all that that involves. It's free. It's a pro bono NGO financed by IKEA and Cambridge University. You can sign up if you're on a board, and all of the information that we get is at your fingertips then if you want to find out more. But while I'm not a specialist, I can very much see how things are developing from a company point of view in terms of long-term valuations of the companies, and we are falling behind all targets. We've got failing policies from the government, lack of incentives for companies to change, and increasingly, it's falling on the companies to make the difference because the government simply aren't stepping up to the plate. And we're really very much reliant on each other. on each of us doing what we can, where we can. I'm going to take a very short stab at just trying to dimensionalize the challenge. And that's more for those who are perhaps new to this topic and haven't really been following it as much. It is a situation like nothing we've faced before. It just to put a few critical facts on the depth and pace of change that demonstrate the need for more urgency and both depth and breadth of action that is required. Developing and implementing transition plans to radically reduce emissions is the key priority for business. But do we really understand what that means? How much change does that really entail? And the one sort of test that we've had in life so far was COVID. And the real life example there, where we had to fundamentally change the way we live, the way we work, we managed as a result of all of those changes to reduce the emissions for the first time ever by 17%. Now that's the degree of change that we require every year now over the next 10 years since 2020. But already in 2021, the rate of emissions went back above what they were in 2019. And no policy has come in from the governments yet for us to do anything. And we just can't afford for businesses and individuals to wait anymore. So the net zero target of 2050 requires us to be at least halfway there by 2030. And that's only 5.5 years away. And so far, we haven't made very much progress. We've had it. Actually, this is the first year I can be a bit more optimistic. And I will try, by the way, it's not my natural state, but I will try. We haven't gone back as far as we have on the other 5 years. But since 2020, when we saw the first ability of us to reduce emissions, we have not incorporated those learnings into the way we do business or the way we live our lives in a way that makes an impact big enough to make the difference we need. And the cold fact of it is for us all that in both business and personal life, that until we are at net zero, we are continuing to contribute to global warming. So it's a harsh reality and it's unprecedented. We don't have many examples of how to do it right. So there are, fundamental changes at the way we live, the way we do business, and the level of risk that we have to take is going to be inevitable. There's no silver bullet. We've just simply left it too late for one solution. We need all solutions right now, the personal ones, the regulation, the business. I was very glad to hear Abisola say that you're not box tickers, because that's absolutely what we don't want. We need every solution that we can to help us move forward to have a chance of success. Now, I mentioned to you that my natural state is problem solving. So I tend not to see the optimistic side. And I've been told off many times that I shouldn't just be doom and gloom. So that there is actually, and I do think this is recent information, significant reason for optimism in what has happened so far. The energy transition, I'm sure you have been following this, because renewable energy is now cheaper than conventional energy, and it happens significantly faster than ever expected. And you can imagine that with that example of change, there will be others that follow as well. So that is a real positive. Emissions are edging in the right direction. They're not falling, they're edging, which is something that I would love to expedite. We've got battery farms, which is critical to the use of renewable energy to store it, sprouting up everywhere. And we are finally getting clarity from the courts about what is legally acceptable and what not. But what I really wanted to do is give you guys some tips, some pointers that you can think about in your board roles. In a way, it's about creating hope too, that you are in positions of influence. You've got responsibility to do what you can do to ensure the outcome for the companies you work for. But how do you create the courage to do that? So 3 pointers to you, and then 3 pointers to an approach that I would suggest you really should get comfortable with. The first I've mentioned already is, I call it fishing in your own pond. We can't change the direction of China, and that does seem sometimes really daunting. But we all have a position of influence, and I'm speaking to a whole ton of you right now who hold roles which we maybe even underestimate what kind of influence we can impact. And it's simply our responsibility to define what that pond of influence is and then act responsibly. I think you also have to make sure you have what I call the mental medicine, and that's both for you and your board. Do you inform yourself enough about this? Do you influence others around you to do the same? I have to make a plug for ChapterZero because you're all potential members. It would be great if you would join. As I say, it's no cost. It's up to you what you want to make out of it. But you have to also be able to judge whether your leadership, in most cases the CEO, is really fit for purpose for the transition and transformation that needs to come. And that too is the mental medicine that you need around you. I think it's a reality to say you've got to be ready to be the tallest poppy in the field. You could well be the lone voice in the boardroom, but this doesn't mean not speaking up. And I know that that's hard. I have my own experience of that. In fact, you might have many people around you who are box tickers and who don't realize the importance of actually discussing and speaking up about it. But ultimately, it will be your reputation if the company doesn't make the right commitments on these topics. So it's not easy, and there are plenty of others that you can talk to about that fact. But the one thing I would encourage you is not to be afraid of being the tallest poppy on your board, if that is the situation you're in. In terms of your approach, just 3 last points. I really think it's important to realize that you cannot wait for perfect. The road to net zero is not a straight one. You're going to make mistakes. I don't mean you personally, I mean the board. We're all going to make mistakes, and that's okay. But you need to get a board culture that is comfortable with the ups and downs of dynamic transition, change, and understanding of the situation. We all like to have calculated risks, but isn't it amazing that I don't know any board, certainly that I sat on, that ever had COVID on the risk register. And the question with this one is, we actually knew a lot more about that than we do about how to transition our companies, but we need to be comfortable with those risks that will inevitably come. I think the last 2 points are very much the same. One is just get on and do it. We have 3 to 5 years to get the groundwork in place to make this the new normal. Whether we hit our 2030 or 50 goals really depends on what happens on our watch, and we are accountable for that outcome. In order to get on and do it, it's about focus. And there's a lot to do. And, ESG, as I mentioned, feels like an overload. Focus your efforts on what is the most important priority for your company and on the opportunities. A lot of people see sustainability as a cost and a penalty and a slowing down of things. It is absolutely the opposite, especially if you think of the cost of waiting for much longer. The E is time boxed, like no other crisis we've had to get meaningful movement on within the next 3 to 5 years. And not doing so has a much greater negative impact than any of the other issues that we're dealing with. So I would really love to hopefully provoke thought in all of you about what you could do differently in your boards, if you're not already doing it. And I recognize many of you will be far ahead on this one. And maybe actually talking about some of these things helps you to gain confidence in standing up to some who are not going to necessarily be on board with this topic. I hope that's provoking thought and that the questions that follow are going to be useful for you. So thank you again, and hope to see some of you in ChapterZero sometime.
Thank you so much, Susan. I absolutely love the phrase, don't be afraid to be the tallest poppy. I think I'm going to take that one with me, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and actually for bringing us all, both from a level setting perspective, but also an encouragement perspective of how we can be inspirational and really drive about change when we think about sustainability and what we can each do. We're now going to change and move over on into breakout rooms. So I hope you will be edified by both that discussion, but also some of the discussion questions we'd like you to all think about in your breakout rooms. The first question is a multi-parter. Do you feel you are sufficiently informed on the topic of climate change to perform your role as a NED or as chair? Do you understand the legal responsibilities of that role? And are you able to ask the right questions to ensure the transition plan is correctly put in place? The second question is, do you have the right mental medicine, i.e. leadership, on your board and the executive team to really help manage you through that transition? And finally, what could you do to influence other board members who may not be on the same page? So some really juicy questions for you to chew on when you're in your breakout rooms. So have a great discussion.